This is Hobby Talks, a podcast series exploring politics and policy-focused conversations with experts, scholars, and those guiding the most complex issues facing our region and state. This podcast is a production from the Hobby School of Public Affairs in partnership with the Center for Student Media at the University of Houston. In this episode, Hobby Talks host Jim Granado, Dean of the Hobby School of Public Affairs, discusses the general election outcome and the future of American democracy with former United States Congressman Adam Kinzinger.
Welcome to Hobby Talks. I'm your host, Jim Granado, Dean of the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston. I'm joined by former United States Congressman Adam Kinzinger for our inaugural episode. He is at the University of Houston to deliver a public lecture on the state of American democracy for the Elizabeth D. Rockwell Center on Ethics and Leadership. Adam Kinzinger served 6 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing the 16th Congressional District of Illinois from 2011 to 2022. Congressman Kinzinger was a member of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He also served on the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Before being elected to Congress, Congressman Kinzinger served in the Air Force in Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. He continues to serve his country as a pilot in the Air National Guard. Welcome, Congressman.
Hey, it's good to be with you. Thanks.
So let's do a little biographical set of questions here. The first thing is, what got you interested in public service?
So you know how and now that I'm a dad, I kind of see it, but when you look at your kids when they're young, you can always kind of get an idea of what they're going to do. You know, if they have an unnatural interest, right, or like an interest that isn't normal for most kids. For me, I was 6 years old. We lived in Jacksonville, Florida for about 3 years. And we were coming back from church one Sunday, and I noticed a yard sign. And the guy was John Lewis, running for mayor of Jacksonville, Florida. And I just was hooked. I was obsessed with the fanfare of it. So I'm talking to my parents. I mean, I'm 6 years old, keep in mind. Talking to my parents, they kind of explain what politics is to me. And again, the idea of signs and the fanfare, I loved it. And I just stayed involved. And as I got older, you know, my interest went from just yard signs to actual policy and, you know, what it means to run government. And it was just kind of always in my DNA. You know, my parents, none of them were in government. I guess my dad he was a bureau chief, for the Department of Public Aid in Illinois, so a little bit of government, but it just was a thing I loved. And to me, it was always about kind of fighting for a cause, a mission. And, you know, when you think about, I think in literally anybody's life, no matter what they do, they can fight for a cause or mission. But I saw that as through government. And I think that's where I got hooked. And I was hooked forever at that point.
Were you in student government in high school or college?
Yeah, so it's funny. I was in junior high. I ran for president of my school. It's like 1,000 people or something like that. And the crazy thing about it is, I mean, this is my competitive side. I'm running against, she was a friend of mine. Her name was Erica. And we were getting ready to have the election. We've been campaigning. And all of a sudden they announced that morning that the election was going to happen. We're just naming Erica and Adam co-presidents. And I was pissed because I'm like, look, I'm sitting here trying to earn a victory. I may have lost, who knows? But I got involved there. And I actually went through a very rebellious streak in high school. So when I turned 16, I started drinking and kind of like, in essence, rebelled against that version of me that was interested in things. I wanted to try to be cool. And it took me a while to come out of that. And thankfully I did, obviously, and got my life straight. But it took me actually failing out of my first year of college at Illinois State because I joined a fraternity and my first semester I
Learn how to drink.
I had 4 Ds and an F. You have to try really hard to get 4 Ds and an F. And but obviously I was re-admitted and got straight A's after that.
And you were in student government at Illinois State at all?
No, I wasn't. But actually, so in 1998, I was, what would I have been? I guess sophomore, junior at Illinois State. And somebody had said to me, like, you should run for a position on the county board, which is like the city council. I'm not sure what the equivalent is in Texas, but I took them seriously and they were joking. Like, they were joking because, so when I was 20, and I was 20 then, I looked like I was 11, right? I mean, I always have looked young. I probably don't anymore because everything's taken a toll on me, but I did then. So they were joking, like, you should run. Anyway, I did, and I ended up winning. And so I served on the McLean County Board 4 years, got reelected, and all that kind of coincided with 9/11 and my decision to join the military. But yeah, it was certainly an interesting foray, and the best advice I ever got, by the way. So the guy that kind of taught me into running, he said, okay, listen, Adam, you're coming on the board. You're this kid. And this was before kids were getting involved in politics.
Right.
Now you see it more. But he's like, don't say a word for a year. Like, you can ask a question, but don't have an opinion for a year. And that was hard when you're 20 and you know everything, right? But I did that. And then when I spoke in the 13th month that I was on the county board, people actually listened to me. So that was a valuable lesson. I'm not sure it stuck with me, but it did then at least.
So you're 21, right, when you're doing this? 21,
Yeah, I was
22?
20 and basically turning, I guess I would have turned 21 4 or 5 months after I was elected.
Okay, and so that's 1999?
99, yeah.
Okay, so you're 2 years later. You're still in college at that point,
Yep.
too? Okay.
No, so I graduated in December of 2000.
Okay.
So, yeah, I would have been like working when 9/11 came around.
Okay, so, and you're working where when 9/11 hits?
So I had this job, STL Technology Partners. I was in sales, and here's the ultimate brutality of it. It was right next to the airport, just happened to be next to the airport. And so I would sit there at my desk and watch airplanes take off and land, and I love flying. And I would just be furious. There are people flying on a Wednesday. I want to do that. Like, not sit here in this office. So, yeah, I was working there and driving to work one day, and I was listening to Howard Stern. Interestingly, I would encourage anybody to go listen to the Howard Stern episode on 9/11.
Oh, my God.
Because he went from, Howard Stern, right, to very serious.
Yeah.
And like, ladies and gentlemen, this isn't a joke, right? And so, yeah. I'm driving into work. I heard that a plane hit the World Trade Center. The second one, I was young enough. I didn't even know there were 2 towers in the World Trade Center. I did at that moment. And then, the Pentagon, and the rest is history. But like, there are moments in your life where your, I guess, path or future can turn on a dime. And that was the first one in my life. And I just knew at that point, I want to go fly planes for the military. I want to defend the country. And was fortunate enough to get selected to do that. And, it was the best. That was actually the best job I've ever had.
So you enlisted in the Air Force, and you chose to fly. Which type of aircraft?
Yeah, so I was picked to go into active duty Air Force, and I was about to leave in a month when the Air National Guard hired me. And you're still federal officers flying Air Force planes. But I think the Air National Guard is a far better lifestyle because you kind of get to pick where you live, and you can be part-time if you want or full-time. And so right before I was leaving for active duty officer training, the Guard unit in Milwaukee hired me. So then I went to officer training with that Guard unit, got commissioned a second lieutenant, and that'd be the fall of 2003. And then in the spring of 2004, went off to pilot training in Enid, Oklahoma. There I flew the T-37, the T-1, yep. And then I went on to learn the KC-135, the big mid-air refueler. And I flew that for 2 years. And then I just wanted to do something much more kind of down in the dirt. And so I got selected to fly the RC-26, which is a reconnaissance plane. So we were actually attached to the Special Forces overseas. We would go do basically targeted finds of bad guys, and then the Special Forces would do what they were going to do to them. And so I've flown that ever since then. It's been it's a fantastic plane, a fantastic mission, and I feel, frankly, very fortunate to have been able to do that through my time in Congress because it kept me grounded. Congress can be pretty brutal, and obviously, but to be able to go, as a pilot, it's more like 4 or 5 days a month when you're part-time, but to be able to go and just hang out with the guys, be a guy, not have to be a congressman, really did a good job of keeping me grounded, and I'm fortunate for it.
So you served both in Iraq and in Afghanistan doing the reconnaissance mission, is that correct?
Yeah, so Afghanistan was much shorter. That was like I would do aeromedical evacuations into there. That was with the tanker, the KC-135, and then some stuff overhead when we were doing refueling. Most of my work was in Iraq, and that was 2 separate deployments, 2008 and 2009. And yeah, flying reconnaissance. We were based out of Balad, which is, I think, just west of Baghdad. And there it's every night you're going outside of the wire, even though it's an airplane. We're flying low, sometimes 8,000 or 9,000 feet, well within, shoulder fired missile range. And half our missions were sheer boredom, like they say. Half of them were pretty intense. And they just recently actually declassified what we were doing there because I never could tell people that for a long time.
Right.
So, but yeah, and it was fantastic. I mean, it sounds weird to say war was fantastic. Like, you don't love every aspect of war, but just being there with a clarity of your mission, knowing what you need to do that day, right? We were going after the worst of the worst. Like, this was during the surge, so we were wrapping up people that were leading Al-Qaeda, some of the top folks. But just knowing what you're going to do, and then, you know, that kind of relational, you know, you're flying with people you like, right? It's impossible to explain unless you've lived it, but we all know, because we all have those groups that you love being around.
Right.
And that was that.
You mentioned you were flying, but you were already a congressman at the time. So that sounds unusual to me, that someone's actually in theater taking on fire and still returning back to D.C.
Yeah, so I wasn't in Congress during those.
Okay.
So I got elected basically, in fact, right when I got back in 2009, I announced my candidacy for Congress. And that's one of my big regrets, to be honest with you, is my units then they deployed then to Afghanistan. So they went to Afghanistan from 10 to, I think, 2014 or 15. And I never deployed with them. And I would do the stateside missions. So we do counter drug, we do the border. We go after drug trafficking south of the border, that kind of stuff. So I could do those missions, but I never deployed to Afghanistan with them. And that's a big regret because, you know, I thought this is probably correct. Like, as a congressman, I can't vacate for 2 months, right, you know, while there are important issues coming up. But I do think my district would have understood. And in hindsight, I wish I'd have done that.
Wow. And the camaraderie, I'm sure you've been with those guys.
It's incredible. And, yeah, you know, when we talk about things like veteran suicide, which is a huge problem, it's down now, but it's been as high as 22 or 23 veterans a day. You know, I think part of the problem is it's not PTSD. Like, yes, there's PTSD. Most veterans don't have PTSD. But it's like that, until fairly recently, you couldn't even really talk about it, of like, you know, being a man, particularly, I can speak as a guy, you know, you're kind of raised to believe that, like, and I think this is true, good masculinity, not bad masculinity, right, but good masculinity, right, is defending people, right? It's fighting for something. Exactly. It's punching up, punching across, not punching down. And when you're there in war doing that, you're reaching this, I mean, it's undescribable. And then when you come back to the United States and now, you know, you have to go shop at the supermarket, or you got, you know, mundane everyday tasks. That's tough to do. It's tough. And that's still something I struggle with a little bit.
Right.
You know, that purpose, I guess.
Right. I mean, there's all this discussion about expanding treatment to include psychedelics and things like that. There's been a holdup, but you have people like Sean Ryan and others are just, you know, saying, why is this getting delayed? I mean, yeah. I think it's like, you know, I think we saw with marijuana particularly that there are obviously medicinal benefits to it. We're adults, right? Alcohol is much more destructive than marijuana. I think it's time to say legalize that, and then, you know, we see in states that legalize it, it's not like, you know, it's not that bad. And then psychedelics, well, I've never tried them and have no idea. People say they have real relief from them. So let's do this, right? Let's get the clinical trials.
It's better than being hooked on opiates, that's for sure.
Amen. So what gave you the idea to run for Congress?
So I actually was very passionate about Iraq and America's role in the world. Now, we can look back and say we never should have invaded Iraq, and I agree with that. But at the time where we're at, I knew that when Barack Obama was running, he wanted to leave Iraq. I also knew that if we left Iraq, it would fall apart, which is what happened. You know, that's when ISIS came up. And so that was kind of the motivation to run. Of course, I just loved everything about politics and all those issues. But the thing that really kind of took me off the sidelines and gave me the decision to run is just like, we can't abandon Iraq. Like, all this stuff that me and the people I've fought with have done to create a fairly stable, after the surge, a fairly stable Iraq, to see that thrown away. I mean, it's how we feel now about Afghanistan, right? Yes. Just a real bitterness. And so I came back, and the person I ran against was a Democrat who had won her first term. And, the district was changing. We're in the middle of a massive political realignment. Maybe we're at the end of it. But, nobody really knew. And I ended up running against her, and I beat her by 15%. And I beat her by the most an incumbent had won by the prior year to then lose by. So it was a delta of like 35%, 30 or 35%. It was the most ever that there was not a scandal involved. And it was a unique campaign.
Why did you beat her by such a strong margin? What was the analysis afterwards?
So first off, it's the year of the Tea Party, and the Tea Party in 2010 is not the Tea Party of today. Tea Party in 2010 was like basically just a bunch of Republicans, and then once we took the House, they kind of just melted away, and then the weirdos stayed and basically became the Tea Party. So there was a lot of energy there, but for me, the young thing I think was important. I was 32. I was the first, or I guess only the second post 9/11 veteran to ever serve in Congress. So, at this time, it's still unique to have a veteran run that was in the current wars. And I also, and this is something I have to remind myself of a lot, particularly now, is like I would not get fixated on the past. I would always paint a vision for the future. I was a pretty moderate Republican. I was running as a moderate, and actually moderates in Illinois used to be cool. So, they used to elect them.
Chuck Percy.
And, yeah, exactly. And so I think it was just a combination of the timing and a focus I had on being optimistic and future focused. And that worked then.
And then you succeeded. You were reelected 5 more times.
Yeah. And
margin stayed the same?
Yeah,
better?
So it's interesting. My very first primary in 2010, there were 6 people running, and I got 67%, which is impossible in a 6-way primary. Everybody else got like whatever the rest of the math is, 8 or something like that. And it was a blowout that I won the general election. And then the Democrats in Illinois came after me. So that was a redistricting year then. And they drew me in with this guy that had served 20 years, Don Manzullo. He was much more conservative than me. I was a moderate, as I mentioned, so they drew me into mostly like what was his district for 20 years. And I thought I'd lose that race. I probably should have. And I ran, and I ended up beating him. And here's an interesting thing, part of the reason. Because I always had a lot of union support because I was a pro-union Republican. And the unions really turned out in that race because the guy I ran against was very anti-union. And this is what would end up being something we see now. Union members polled, in many cases, their first Republican ballot to vote. And there was a huge amount of crossover that saved me. And so I've always appreciated that. Now the crossover seems to be for the wrong reason that we're seeing. Right. But yeah.
Right. So
and then I got elected every other time, including in 2016 when I didn't have opposition in the primary or the general election, which was nice. That's a good way to run.
Yeah, I can sleep easier.
Yeah, exactly.
Of the initiatives you were involved with while you were in Congress, pick 2 that you're most proud of that you really helped the country?
So there's a lot that I'm proud of. Most of it has to do, I guess all of it really has to do with, in my mind, foreign policy, America's role in the world, which is why I'm so heartbroken with where the country is going now, by the way. Eastern Europe. So one of the initiatives I led, which is law now, is basically Eastern Europe security, energy security. And this is before, yes, Ukraine, I think it happened by then, Crimea, but not the opening of the full-scale war yet.
Right.
And our goal in this was to create a public-private partnership to begin to transition Eastern Europe off of like the old Soviet pipes, basically, and to conform them to Western energy. And we've made a lot of progress in that. And I think that's actually come in very handy in the war in Ukraine now. Obviously Russia's going after their energy infrastructure, but they can't just shut the pipe down now like they used to be able to. And the other is really with Syria. And this is a heartbreaking thing, but I always thought we should have intervened against the Assad regime in Syria. And let me say, Tulsi Gabbard, as of our recording this, has been named DNI for Donald Trump. And she loves Assad. Assad is a brutal dictator, murderous man. And that's actually why Tulsi and I had a falling out. We used to be friends until that. But, I thought we missed an opportunity. And so I always would fight. And in fact, at one point, I went to Turkey and helped to finish negotiations between this kind of Christian minority group and the Free Syrian Army that were opposing Assad. And so we all met right on the border of Syria, and we pinned this agreement. Unfortunately, the Free Syrian Army got beat, and although there's still some rumblings again. But, those are the kinds of things I'm most proud of. Right. Obviously, domestically, I was on energy. So, I was actually a proponent for green energy, which is rare as a Republican. But yeah, most of the things I'm really proud of is just this fighting for America's role in the world.
Okay, let's fast forward to what happened last week. What were your initial thoughts, and what does the presidential election outcome say about voters?
So, look, my initial thoughts are, obviously I was not supportive of Donald Trump. I really think he's a danger, honestly. But the American people spoke. And I actually think to an extent it's good that he won so broadly, because now people have an opportunity to actually see what he's pushing. Exactly. Look, for the last 8 years, we have fought against his worst impulses. Mass deportations. We fought against that and stopped it. All these other things. And I kind of feel like, to an extent, we protected America from the consequences of his election. And now we can't do that. And so America's going to see. And maybe this is very important. So I was upset by the results. I respect the results. And now just trying to figure out what is the role. I'm not going to oppose everything that Donald Trump does. I'll try to support things I do agree with. But when it comes to like mass deportations, is that really what we want to be as a country? Succumbing to Russia, abandoning Ukraine, is that really what we want to be? But look, the American people made their voice heard. And unfortunately, I think they're going to see that there's a difference between what you can just promise and what you can actually deliver.
So the Republicans appear to expand their electoral coalition in ways, forever.
Yeah.
I just don't recall this. There was a time when African Americans were in line with the Republican Party, but that stopped starts eroding in the late 30s, but it really takes shape during the Civil Rights movement. So, what lessons should the two political parties learn from how voters cast their ballots this time? What do you suggest what Republicans should be doing, what Democrats should be doing?
Look, if I'm advising Republicans, and again, I'm not happy with them, so hopefully they're not listening. If I would advise them, it's this. It's like, keep doing what you're doing, right? If it's just about power, keep doing what you're doing, because obviously you're winning. One of the things that I think is a huge problem, and I kind of touched on it a little bit, which is men. Men feel very isolated right now. We've spent all this time, and this is a criticism of the Democrats, we spend all this time reaching out to women, trying to get to women. That's a good thing, but we've ignored men. And men under the age of 25, who spent the last 10 years being told that everything masculine is toxic, felt very empty. And they're like, what's my role in this world? Mm. And all of a sudden, Donald Trump comes along and presents a legitimately toxic view of masculinity, but in the absence of any other definition, they're attracted to that. Mm. And so to Democrats, it's this. Let's get away from some of the woke stuff. The numbers are just there. It's we can protect people that need protecting, but there's a certain difference between protecting people and kind of shoving it in people's face that don't want it, right? Mm. Figure out what that is. But the other thing is, reach out to men and present a positive version of masculinity. Because again, in the absence of it, they're attracted to this toxic version. That's a long process, but it's extremely important.
Yeah. So let's turn to your book.
Yeah.
On the national campaign trail, you discussed putting your country first above party affiliation and spoke of an alliance to defend democracy. What's your message for the future?
Look, it's this. It's democracy, as we can see, it's the hardest form of government. I used to not think it was. I used to think it was easy. Now I realize it's really hard, because the second you lose trust, it's hard to ever bring it back. That's the thing you need. It's like if you're playing a baseball game, both teams have to agree on the rules. You can hit the ball and go to first base, all the rules, because the umpire can't force you to do something. He can call an out, and you have to obey that. But if all of a sudden you're playing at St. Louis and the Cardinals hit and they decide to go to third base first and then home and say, well, that counts, the game falls apart. Yep. And that's democracy. Making sure that everybody gets a chance to vote And here's a couple other big things: pushing back against the oligarchy that's being built, this ownership of information like Elon Musk, this insane amount of money in politics, and misinformation. We could do a whole hour podcast about this stuff. But I think right now, yes, Donald Trump's going to be president for 4 years. Love it or hate it, whatever. But the one thing we have to do is protect the guardrails of democracy where we can. So that's my advice to anybody. Let's focus on protecting those guardrails of democracy, and we'll have another election in 4 years.
So was it your experience as a congressman gave you the idea to write the book? Was that really what you were going, what you experienced?
Yeah, what I didn't want to do, I didn't want to just write like a book about me, right? But I also recognized that the era I lived in Congress was really this thing that saw the Republican Party go from what it was to what it is today. And so in me telling my story, I'm able to talk about the trajectory of where the GOP went. So I think I see it as like an important kind of, in essence, historical work to just to say, this is from the inside what I saw. This is why we are. And my hope is that someday when, political scientists or sociologists are studying the GOP, that maybe this will make a reference somewhere in some of those papers.
Let's turn to Texas. So you're from a blue state. I'm from a blue state. We're both from Illinois.
Yeah.
And it's So what advice would you have for the GOP here? I mean, would you see the GOP, are there certain things you see about the GOP that you think could be self-destructing and that their majority may start eroding? Because it didn't happen last week.
Yeah.
But
I think it's going to be whatever happens to the GOP nationally. I mean, right now they're the dog that caught the car. They caught the car. Now you got to do something with it, right? You made all these promises. You promised 100% tariff and no inflation. Good luck with that, but go ahead. You have an opportunity. You promised mass deportations. By the way, when Americans start seeing people with brown skin being rounded up and put in camps, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be very popular. And so, but you have an opportunity. So if I'm actually like legitimately talking to the GOP of Texas, I'd say, look, you're doing a good job of broadening your coalition. Sure, but you're broadening it on hate. You're broadening it on division and dark energy. Have some optimism, a focus on the future. Talk about unity. But they've been winning without that. To the Democrats, I would say this. People like Colin Allred was a perfect person to put up against Ted Cruz. Yes, he lost. He did outperform Kamala Harris in Texas. Yes. So that goes to show there were a lot of Republican crossover votes. I was one of those, by the way. And so I think to the Democrats in Texas, it's particularly on statewide, put up moderate Democrats. They can speak to the border. It's a real concern people have. They can speak to those issues, not too radical, but also maintains the thing that makes Democrats Democrats.
I want to wrap up with a couple questions related to advice you give students. I mean, so most of our students have ambitions they're all be involved in public service in one way or another, whether it's elected office or just nonprofit. It'll be public service. What are the suggestions you have so they can target a career there and succeed?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is, recognize that if you find joy in what you do, that's worth way more than money. I'm a guy that has found joy in what I've done, and I also make good money now. I much prefer finding joy in what I do than any amount of money. And that's the key. I know it seems counterintuitive, but it's so true. So chase your passion there. If you're looking at running for office, don't be afraid of losing. Now, you don't need to go on a suicide mission, right? You don't have to, if you know you're going to lose and you want to, that's fine. But, you're not a coward if you don't run in something you're not going to win in. But if there's I got a chance, and I think don't be afraid to lose. Right. Because being afraid to lose, people often don't take that chance, take that challenge. So that's the big thing. Also, if you're going to run for office, find whatever your passion is besides that. Chase that and look for the opportunity to run. Because the one thing you don't want to do in your life, I know so many people like this, you probably do too, spent their whole life wanting to be a congressman or a senator or something, never got there, and now they're really bitter. And look, sometimes you get there and sometimes you don't. But there is nothing more satisfying than fighting for a cause bigger than yourself.
Channel your energy.
Channel your energy. So I guess that's probably the first and foremost advice I would give.
Okay, so that's the big picture. In terms of strategy, did you participate in intern programs, things like that?
I did.
Yeah.
So in 1999, I interned in Washington, D.C. for Peter Fitzgerald, who was a senator from Illinois.
Sure.
And I loved it. It was my intro into D.C., and I don't think I would be there without that experience because I knew what I was getting into. It certainly helped me in the process of once I became a congressman. So that's one thing I would encourage is find a good internship. Maybe it's government, maybe it's federal government, state government, maybe it's, corporate world, whatever it is, or the nonprofit world. I think there's real benefits in doing things like an internship, even if it doesn't pay a whole lot.
Final piece of advice for our students besides what Gary said.
Look, you're going to be the generation that has to pull us out of this mire. And I don't say that to be like falsely inspirational. It's just true. You all are going to have to break the current way of thinking. This idea that everything is either right or left. There's two sides to every issue. Let's take the issue of abortion. There's not pro-life and pro-choice. Those aren't even real things. There's about 100 different positions on abortion, right? And same with guns, same with taxes. There's 100 different positions on all these things. Be true to who you are, but be willing to break the system, not in a bad way, but just in terms of how we think about it. You are the generation that's going to do that. Because I'm going to tell you, these old people in D.C. aren't going to do it. They're vested in this thing continuing how it is. And also, the last thing, don't put the weight of the world on your shoulders. I know so many people that are depressed, particularly because of this election. And I get it. I'm pretty sad about it. But I did everything I could, right? A lot of people did everything they could. It's not my fault this happened. And so try to take that burden, take it off. Because when you feel lighter and you're happier, you actually can maintain your energy and stay engaged, which is what we really need.
Right. Well, Congressman, thank you for sharing your insights with me today. And to our audience, we're grateful for your listenership. Stay tuned for another episode in December with the biographers of a newly published book on our school's namesake, Bill Hobby. More details, visit our website and school media platforms. And again, Congressman, thank you very much.
It was good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This podcast represents the views of the guests and not of the University of Houston. The Center for Student Media provided sound and engineering support, and Soundcast Music provided the podcast song. The series is produced by the Communications and Marketing team at the Hobby School of Public Affairs. For more information on Hobby Talks, including past and upcoming episodes, visit uh.edu/hobby/hobbytalks.